A coffin at the altar of St. Peter's Basilica can make even the most powerful Catholic resume look small. Cardinal Camillo Ruini had carried some of the heaviest responsibilities in the Italian Church. He had governed the Diocese of Rome in the Pope's name. He had stood at St. John Lateran, the Pope's own cathedral. He had guided the Italian bishops through years when Catholic faith, public life, politics, culture, and conscience were pressing against each other in almost every direction. But when Pope Leo XIV stood before Ruini's coffin, he did not reduce his life to influence. He called him a wise and diligent shepherd. That word matters. A shepherd does not merely hold office. A shepherd keeps watch when the road is unclear, when the flock is divided, when truth is unpopular, and when responsibility becomes too heavy to be carried as personal achievement. On Ruini's coffin rested the open book of the Gospels. It was not a symbol of Catholic decoration. It was the measure being placed over his whole life. The Church was saying something stronger than praise. It was saying that a life spent near power is only Christian when it remains under the gospel. Cardinal Camillo Ruini was not simply a senior churchman with an impressive biography. For decades, he stood at one of the most sensitive crossroads in Catholic life. Rome, the Italian bishops, and the public voice of the Church in a changing society. From 1991 to 2008, Ruini served as Vicar General of the Diocese of Rome. That means he helped govern the Pope's own diocese in the Pope's name. Rome is not just the city where the Vatican sits. It is a local church with parishes, priests, families, schools, wounds, arguments, and ordinary believers trying to live the faith in the shadow of the universal Church. He also served during those same years as Archpriest of the Basilica of St. John Lateran. That detail matters because St. John Lateran is not just another historic church. It is the cathedral of the Bishop of Rome. St. Peter's may be the most famous basilica in the world, but St. John Lateran is the Pope's cathedral. Ruini's service there placed him at the symbolic heart of the Pope's identity as a bishop, not only as a global figure. Then there was his role as president of the Italian Episcopal Conference from 1991 to 2007. That office placed him before the bishops of Italy during years when the Church could not hide from public questions. Family, education, secularization, politics, the place of Catholic teaching in national life, all of it pressed on the Church at once. Ruini was not leading from a quiet corner. He was helping the Italian Church speak while the ground beneath European Catholic culture was shifting. Pope Leo also remembered that Ruini had worked with some of the great saints of recent Catholic history, including St. Paul VI and St. John Paul II. Paul VI carried the Church through the aftermath of the Second Vatican Council, when renewal, confusion, hope, and conflict all arrived together. John Paul II gave the Church a language of courage before the modern world, insisting that truth about the human person was not the enemy of freedom, but its foundation. Leo said Ruini absorbed the most from St. John Paul II. That is not a small remark. It suggests that Ruini learned from a pope who believed the Church must enter history without surrendering to it, speak to modern culture without being swallowed by it, and defend human dignity without reducing the gospel to a political slogan. That is the background behind Leo's funeral homily. He was not only honoring a man who held major offices, he was remembering a bishop formed by a particular Catholic conviction, that the Church serves people best when she tells the truth clearly, patiently, and without apology. And that is why Leo's words at the altar were not ordinary funeral courtesy. Pope Leo XIV stood before Ruini's coffin and chose the kind of language the Church reserves for a life judged by service rather than self-display. He called him a wise and diligent shepherd, a man who had served the Church both in the humblest tasks and in responsibilities laden with the greatest weight. That phrase held the whole tension of Ruini's life. He had not been a hidden figure. He had occupied offices where words mattered, where decisions had consequences, and where guidance could shape the direction of bishops, priests, and ordinary Catholics. Yet Leo placed the humblest tasks beside the greatest responsibilities, as if to say that Christian leadership cannot be understood by rank alone. The same vocation has to survive both places. It has to remain faithful when no one is watching, and it has to remain faithful when everyone is. Leo then described Ruini as a guide for the people of God and for his brother bishops, someone who offered direction in important and delicate moments. That sentence matters because it does not flatten the past into polite praise. Delicate moments are not easy moments. They are the moments when Catholics disagree about what courage requires, when public pressure rises, when silence can look prudent, and when speaking clearly can carry a cost. The Pope also recalled with gratitude the projects, insights, and initiatives Ruini carried out across his many years of service. That matters because Ruini's legacy was not presented as a vague atmosphere of influence. It was concrete. He thought, he planned, he advised, he built. He helped the Church act in history, not as an idea floating above the world, but as a living body trying to stay faithful inside real conditions. Then Leo moved from Ruini's offices to the readings of the funeral Mass. The readings, he said, pointed to fidelity to Christ and to the Church. And Ruini had been a joyful example of that fidelity. The first reading came from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, where Paul says that nothing can separate believers from the love of God. Leo said that this truth had animated the late cardinal. Animated is the key word. Leo was not saying Ruini merely admired the sentence. He was saying that this conviction moved him from within. The love of God was not a decorative idea placed over a public career after it was finished. It was the source that gave that career its Christian meaning. The Gospel reading came from John, where Jesus prays to the Father that those given to him may be where he is. Leo said that in those words one could find the program, the direction, and the ultimate goal of Ruini's life. That is a striking way to describe a bishop. His program was not finally a church policy. His direction was not finally institutional success. His goal was communion with Christ and helping others reach that same communion. Leo said Ruini had spent his life for the good of his brothers, constantly searching for God's designs for his own salvation and for theirs. That is the serious heart of the Catholic priesthood. A bishop is not only responsible for managing the visible life of the Church, he is responsible before God for souls. His own soul is not exempt from that responsibility. That is why the open gospel on the coffin mattered so much. It was the book that had judged his words, his decisions, his offices, and his final weakness. In the end, the Church did not place a report, a title, or a public achievement over him. It placed the Word of God. Then Leo turned to the sentence Ruini had chosen as the compass of his episcopal life. A church that cannot say what truth is will eventually lose the ability to say what freedom is. That is why Ruini's episcopal motto became one of the sharpest parts of Pope Leo's homily: "The truth will set you free." Leo said the cardinal's personal qualities reached their highest expression in that line. Not in his titles, not in his influence, not in the length of his service. In a sentence from the Gospel that joins truth to liberation. That connection is easy to praise and hard to live. Modern society often treats freedom as the right to remain undefined, unattached, and uncorrected. The Gospel offers something more demanding. It says the human person becomes free not by escaping truth, but by receiving it, even when truth exposes what is disordered, wounded, or false. Leo said this biblical wisdom is especially instructive in an age marked by disorientation and fluidity. Those are careful words. Disorientation means people no longer know where to look for a stable moral horizon. Fluidity means the categories themselves keep shifting. In such a world, the Church faces a real danger on both sides. She can speak truth without charity and turn the gospel into a weapon. Or she can speak charity without truth and leave people trapped in confusion. Ruini's motto refuses both temptations. It says that truth is not cruelty when it comes from Christ. It says that freedom is not chaos when it is ordered toward God. And it says that the Church's public voice still matters, not because Catholics want power, but because human beings cannot be healed by lies. That is not an easy message for any age, and it is especially difficult in a culture suspicious of authority, wounded by scandal, and tired of arguments. Leo was not pretending that quoting the Gospel settles every conflict. Bishops still have to decide how to speak. Catholics still have to decide whether they want truth when it costs them something. And the Church still has to prove, again and again, that her clarity is ordered towards salvation, not domination. That is where Ruini's life becomes more than a memory. A man who held high office was being measured by whether his service pointed beyond office. A cardinal who helped guide bishops was being remembered by whether he had been guided by Christ. A public churchman was being placed under the sentence that tests every Christian public witness. Only truth can make freedom real, and the Church's final word over Ruini was not argument. Before the final blessing over his body, Pope Leo prayed that God would grant Cardinal Ruini the reward of peace that knows no end. He thanked those who had accompanied, assisted, and supported him, both during his years of ecclesial service and later through old age and infirmity. Ruini had died on June 16th at the age of 95, and that Thursday afternoon in St. Peter's Basilica, cardinals and bishops prayed with his coffin before them. Then the Church spoke in the language she uses when words have reached their limit. After a prayer in Latin, Leo sprinkled the coffin with holy water and incensed it with the thurible. The gospel remained open. If this helped you understand what the Church is actually doing in the world, liking the video helps more people find this kind of Catholic coverage. Subscribe for more Catholic news, Vatican context, and stories from the living history of the Church. And tell me in the comments, what does Cardinal Ruini's motto, "The truth will set you free," demand from the Church in an age of disorientation and fluidity? The story continues, and so does the work.